Hey everyone, so this video is mainly for Rosalind and a couple of other folks who felt like they were still confused by our integrating quote exercise. So very quickly, hopefully very quickly, I just want to explain again the steps that we went through to create a body paragraph that integrated a quote. Firstly, though, I want to just clarify this exercise is outside of the world of the ALST, right? So the ALST exercises, I wanted to take a break from that just for this week. We'll get back to the ALST stuff next week. Actually, that will be the last time we talk about the ALST. So some of you were kind of confused because you were trying to do the prompt one layout where you were giving me, Carson argues, Carson claims to support this claim. This exercise was just about writing a body paragraph. You chose the topic and you integrated a quote from Carson's article. So let's go through the steps you need to take. The first step is asking yourself, well, what do I want to talk about in my paragraph? Okay, so you read Carson's article. What do you want to talk about? Now, as you're answering this question, I don't want you to run to Carson's article. I want you to ask yourself, having read his article, what are you interested in talking to your readers about further, or what is a new idea you want to talk about with your reader? Sorry. So you'll see I said I want to talk about the use of fear to create policies. I read Carson's article and I was left thinking about how fear can motivate so many of our politicians and so many of our fellow citizens. So once I realized that, I try to create some sort of topic sentence. The topic sentence I came up with is fear is often used to motivate politicians and citizens to make life-changing decisions. So that's my topic sentence. Again, what do I want to talk about? I want to talk about this, and then transforming it into a topic sentence. Then I want to ask myself, okay, well, given that this is what I want to talk about, what quote do I want to use to elaborate on my point? What quote do I want to use to elaborate on this idea that I present in my topic sentence? And so I picked the same quote that Belkis gave us earlier this evening, or sorry, this afternoon. And I just write it out for myself so that I know I'm spelling everything correctly, and also I can see the key words as I do the next step. And the next step is the context sentence. So just to clarify, first thing I did in this process of creating a paragraph is topic sentence, which is right here, figure out what quote I want to use, which is right here, and now I need to figure out, how am I going to provide context for this quote that I just chose? Because remember, you have your topic sentence and then you need a context sentence before you can give me this quote. So I have a couple of options, right? This context sentence can define a term that's mentioned here. So I might want to define, the Paris tragedy that's being referred here, give my reader some context. Maybe I want to define refugees and give my reader some context. That's one option. The next thing I can do is summarize the source that the quote is coming from. So this quote is coming from the Carson article, right? I can give a sentence that summarizes what the entire article is about. Again, I don't have to, but I can to provide context. The last thing I can do is I can provide background of the author of the quote. So the person who's saying this is Carson. I can give background information to my reader about Carson to provide some context on who he is. I can do one of these three things. I don't have to do all of them. Okay? So I decide that I want to give my readers some context on who Ben Carson is, and I'd like to define the tragedy a little bit more. I think that's important for my reader. So I decide that's what I want to do, and I do it. Here's my sentence. Ben Carson, a former presidential hopeful, used memories of recent terrorist attacks in Paris to influence U.S. policy change. So again, this now is going to come right after this topic sentence in order to set the stage for the quote. Okay? So I've done this. Now the next step is asking myself, what do I want to explain about this quote, right? How am I going to explain this quote? Because well integrated means context, quote, explanation. So I have options again. I can, after I give the quote, just explain what the quote means in my own words, right? I can explain why the quote is so important to proving my overall point, right? So why is this quote helping me, or how is this quote helping me prove my original topic sentence, right, about fear? And I can do this in several ways. I can explain what this quote is showing, so using a sentence like, this quote shows. I can explain what the quote is proving, using a sentence like, this quote proves. Or I can explain, and this goes back to Mimi's point, I can explain why the quote that I've just given you is actually not true. And I'm doing this because if I prove to you that this quote is not true, I'm that much closer to proving my own topic sentence, right? Okay. So I decide that I want to explain how this quote illustrates my point, right? And why this quote is so important to my overall topic sentence. So I have what follows. This quote illustrates the way fear is used to motivate others to make decisions. Again, you see that formula? In fact, an act committed by lone terrorists should not mean a universal policy change, particularly when that policy change is the opposite of what the United States stands for. Fear cannot be grounds for legitimate policy change. Instead, logic, evidence, and reason must determine our response to recent terrorist attacks. So, I've done all the parts, now I have to put it all together. And here is the paragraph. Let me make it a little bit bigger on the off chance you can't see it. Okay. So let's read it all together. You'll read it on your own out loud with me. Fear is often used to motivate politicians and citizens to make life-changing decisions. Topic sentence. Ben Carson, a former presidential hopeful, used memories of recent terrorist attacks in Paris to influence U.S. policy change. Context sentence. Carson writes, that's my signal phrase, given the tragedy in Paris last Friday, the U.S. simply cannot, should not, and must not accept any Syrian refugees. Here, this is the quote, right? So, topic sentence, context sentence, quote. Here, Carson uses fear to motivate others to make decisions. In fact, an act committed by lone terrorists should not mean a universal policy change, particularly when that policy change is the opposite of what the United States stands for. Fear cannot be grounds for legitimate policy change. Instead, logic, evidence, and reason must determine our response to recent terrorist attacks. Now, this is a draft, right? I already spot some areas that I'd like to improve. For example, I think I want to replace this sentence with something that's a little bit more specific. Maybe something that talks about like the policy change is not allowing. So fear cannot be grounds for not allowing Syrian refugees to enter the United States. Instead, logic, evidence, and reason must determine our response to recent terrorist attacks. Or, yeah, I might even change this. Sorry, I'm always revising. Instead, logic, evidence, and reason must determine our response to the Syrian refugee crisis. And I might even add a sentence or a clause, especially when this response can have dire consequences for all involved. Now, why did I add this clause? Because I wanted to trace back to my original topic sentence that talks about the life-changing decisions. So this is an example of a kind of paragraph you might create for this exercise. Hopefully, Rosalind, this is a little bit clearer. If it's still not clear, we can keep talking about this next class, but I do hope that next class we can move a little bit away from this and talk specifically about the last prompt of the ALST. In any case, thank you for a wonderful class today, and I will see you next week.